Welcome back to the Philosophy for Philistines channel, also known as Politics for Plebeians, with your host Bill Reimer, up here at the trailer in Gatineau, where we'll see if we can record a podcast on why it's important not to call a spade a shovel. The entire purpose of postmodernism is to redefine. This has now become a major issue in the West. Lacking even the ability to define a phenomenon, we resort to either denying that the phenomenon exists or call it something which doesn't accurately describe it. Joe Rogan made the mistake of calling Justin Trudeau a communist. He said, "They got to get rid of that guy," Rogan said. "He's gross. He's a sketchy guy. He's got some kind of fucking shaky deals. I would love to see where the money is coming from. Why do you want everyone to get injected every 4 months? We don't need that anymore." A tweet by the Toronto Sun about Rogan's comments has drawn over 6,000 retweets and 34,000 likes in 4 days. Many readers said Rogan had hit the nail right on the head. Now, obviously, Joe Rogan is bombastic. That is a given, and is likely the reason he is followed by as many as he is. One thing he does not do is talk down to his audience, which is yet another reason for his incredible success. Do I watch him? Not often, since I find his rhetoric to be lowbrow and silly. But that is not to imply he doesn't have a point. The real issue with what he stated is that Rogan was unable to define accurately the variety of totalitarian belief held by Trudeau. Trudeau obviously is not a traditional Marxist as first described by Marx and Engels, which was then reworked into the countless versions of Marxism employed by Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Castro, on ad infinitum. But he is something else, something less obvious but no less insidious, for Trudeau is a cultural Marxist. He is an advocate of corrupting institutions from within, rather than resorting to violent revolution from without. That Joe Rogan was unable to define, but it still does not mean that the ideology which motivates Trudeau doesn't have its origins in the ideas first proposed by Marx and Engels. A few weeks ago, the whole media went into a frenzy because Pierre Poilievre criticized Global News. Justin Trudeau threatened to use police against journalists for asking him questions, and yet the media is silent. And the progressives in the CPC are tearing their party apart, fighting the genuine conservative position of Pierre Poilievre. They have joined the woke elite on the far left in Pierre Poilievre derangement syndrome, rejecting out of hand any return to fiscal sensibility and limited constitutional government. But how is this possible? Why are so few able to define the source of their own beliefs? Ignorance is rampant, and there is a war on words. I want to encourage all of you to learn to speak and write precisely, because we are watching our sacred institutions being deconstructed right in front of our eyes, as we are being told that to recognize this is equivalent to being a conspiracy theorist. In an article from the Toronto Sun dated July the 20th, 2022, entitled "Monty Python legend John Cleese rips woke culture for disastrous effect on comedy," Cleese stated, "I think it's particularly worrying at the moment, because you can only create an atmosphere of freedom when you're not checking everything you say critically before you move on," Cleese said. A lot of comedians now are sitting there, and when they think of something, they say something like, "Can I get away with it? I don't think so. So-and-so got into trouble, and he said that. Oh, she said that." You see what I mean? And that's the death of creativity. You can do the creation and then criticize it, but you can't do them at the same time. So if you're worried about offending people and constantly thinking of that, you're not going to be very creative. So I think it is a disastrous effect, Cleese said. Even Cleese had his mic taken away once for remarking about historical events surrounding slavery and the British. Cleese had said that England was owed reparations from both Italy and France, referring to the historic invasions of the Romans and 1,000 years later by the Normans under William the Conqueror, according to the Daily Mail. I provide links for all these articles in the notes below my podcast. If woke spells death to comedy, and someone as traditionally left-leaning as Cleese is warning about its disastrous effects on comedy, it is fair to state that the manner in which it is affecting politics is far more disastrous. We live in an age where political debate has become impossible because we are permitting enemies of free speech to frame what questions may be asked and when they may be asked. If that alone isn't reminiscent of the worst totalitarianism of the 20th century, then you are sadly wanting in your education of what constitutes a truly free and tolerant society. Everything that Trudeau does is crafted for photo ops. There is no substance, merely pretense, as we watch the economy implode, our energy policies fail, and our foreign policies result in supporting to authoritarian regimes which are antithetical to our very way of life. But there is something far worse. This pathological thinking has infected the entire Western world. Our elected representatives and bureaucrats appear to have stolen a page out of the same playbook, one which was written by Aldous Huxley rather than the more overt kind of dystopia written about by George Orwell, who himself was a socialist. Frankly, I have never figured out how someone who found such fault with socialism in practice could have become a socialist himself, since assigning such massive, centralized authority to the state has invariably led to tyranny. But this question is for another day. What we do know is this: for the first time in human history, enormous centralized power is being accumulated by a cooperating global elite who write about reassigning our wealth into their hands. The fact that they write about it and speak about it at their global forums on economics is de facto proof. Then there is my own naivety. I was once a huge fan of roots music, an erstwhile musician, and a promoter of shows who hosted performances because I admired those whose talents far exceeded that of my own, assuming that their talents equated into them being intelligent. I believed that since they were so aligned with free thinking and individual expression, that they would be the last to swallow an enormous global power grab by wealthy elites who promote postmodern thought and cultural Marxism, beliefs which would require censoring those who actually do love freedom. Yet just the other day, one of Canada's most renowned roots rockers had the temerity to confront me for enjoying time at my trailer here on the Gatineau River, telling me that if things were so bad, that said enjoyment wouldn't be possible. This idiotic personal attack, after 2.5 years of destroying the ability of musicians to perform live due to lockdowns, which did little to mitigate the pandemic. I am completely convinced that Cleese is absolutely correct, but that the consequences of cancel culture and wokeness is far more dire than Cleese warned about. Yes, maybe Trudeau isn't a Marxist in the traditional sense, but the government he leads provably and without doubt promotes the worst kinds of authoritarian censorship as they pursue policies that have resulted in economic ruin and the death of limited constitutional government under parliamentary oversight. And fuck you, Jack. You've let them destroy your own profession, just like Cleese warned. You're pathetic.